Okay, let's unpack this a bit. When we think about something like weight loss, our minds often jump straight to calories, carbs, sheer discipline, right? We're
Mhm.
sort of conditioned to believe it's this constant battle of willpower, a really strict regimen. But what if that conventional wisdom, that whole narrative we hear everywhere, is actually missing something? Well, something crucial. What if we've been looking at the wrong part of the puzzle? And the real challenge lies much deeper. Today, we're doing a deep dive into some really, really profound source material. We've got personal accounts, some incredibly insightful field notes, and deep reflections on the experience of semaglutide. And all of this is filtered through the unique and honestly pretty revolutionary lens of a man named Dan Hollis. His perspective isn't just different, it kind of challenges almost everything we thought we knew about personal transformation.
It really does. These sources, they fundamentally challenge our most basic assumptions. And just to be clear, this isn't really a deep dive into, say, specific diet plans or
Mm.
even the biology of a miracle drug. I mean, yes, semaglutide is known for its role in regulating appetite and blood sugar, often used for weight management. But our mission today is more about exploring the profound psychological shifts, the identity shifts that can accompany significant physical transformation. We're looking at a fresh way to understand what's really going on inside when the outside starts changing.
And here's the absolute core idea from these sources, the one that really makes you pause. It was never about the food.
Hmm.
That's a powerful statement, isn't it? So, this deep dive is going to explore a central, kind of provocative question that stems right from that. What if you weren't broken, just confused? Okay, so let's start with Dan Hollis's really unconventional description of what semaglutide actually does. He moves way beyond just simple appetite suppression. He puts it so powerfully, almost viscerally. Uh, Semaglutide gives you silence, and silence gives you truth. It's not about what it takes away, it's about the space it creates.
That phrase, silence gives you truth, it's incredibly potent, isn't it?
Hmm.
For many people, that constant internal chatter about food, the cravings, the guilt, the planning, negotiating with yourself, that's been like a lifetime companion for them.
Hmm.
Dan suggests that for some individuals, this isn't just less hunger. It might be the first truly honest moment they've had in 20 years.
Mm,
A moment where that food noise finally just goes quiet.
wow. 20 years.
Yeah. It's a profound internal shift. It lets them maybe finally hear themselves. And this new quiet space, which is often completely unprecedented for them, it isn't about simple control like we usually think.
Mm.
He calls it an intentional surrender to a different way of being, a complete stop to that constant internal battle.
And the impact of that unique insight, that idea of silence, definitely wasn't lost on the original author of our source material. Their reaction was basically, Jesus, that's better than anything I ever wrote for a newsletter. It clearly hit home on a really deep level. What specific aspects of Dan's insight do you think really struck the author so strongly there? And how does this silence idea just fundamentally reframe the whole weight loss narrative?
That's a great question. I think what probably struck the author, and what's so compelling for us too, is that Dan isn't talking about calories or macros here. He's
Hmm.
talking about the existential experience of food.
Mm,
We've all been taught to see weight loss as this fight against hunger, right?
yeah.
A battle. But Dan just flips that script completely. He's saying, look, for many people, hunger wasn't just physical. It was maybe a symptom of something much deeper. So by offering silence, semaglutide doesn't just reduce appetite. It removes a constant distraction, maybe a coping mechanism. And that allows people to finally confront what was underneath the food noise all along.
Right.
It really transforms the narrative from one of like deprivation and fighting to potentially one of revelation and self-discovery.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting and maybe really challenging too. What happens when this quiet, the silence people might have longed for actually arrives,
Yeah.
but they don't really know what to do with it? Dan's observation here is incredibly sharp. He says, most people relapse not into hunger, but into confusion.
Confusion. Yeah. This raises a really important question. When that habitual noise of food or maybe old routines is gone,
Yeah.
people might feel like they've lost their favorite lie, as Dan puts it quite starkly.
Oof, lost their favorite lie. That's heavy.
It is. I mean, imagine the familiar comfort, the coping mechanism, that constant internal monologue that filled their days,
Mm.
suddenly just absent. It's got to be disorienting.
Yeah, I can see that.
So without new guidance, or maybe a fresh framework for this new internal quiet, Dan says they often reach for the thing they know. Cheese puffs, cheat days, chaos.
Chaos, wow.
Yet not necessarily out of actual physical hunger, but more out of this unfamiliar void. This disorientation when their old identity, the one built around food, has started to dissolve. It's almost like the brain is just searching for a pattern it understands, even if it's a self-sabotaging one.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Like, have you ever experienced a big change in your own life? Maybe a new job, kids leaving home, a sudden, unexpected quiet? And you find that the new landscape that emerges afterwards feels kind of unsettling or disorienting, like you've lost a familiar anchor, even if maybe that anchor wasn't really serving you well. To really get a handle on this confusion, let's bring in a really vivid anecdote from Dan's field notes. This comes from entry, #2, the morning her reflection didn't recognize her. It tells the story of Adrienne. She's 53, and it's about a seemingly ordinary moment, brushing her teeth. She looks up into the mirror, and the thinner woman looking back. Well, it didn't feel like a triumph. It felt like a disappearance.
Wow, disappearance, not triumph.
Exactly. Not the happy celebratory moment you'd expect after months of making really significant progress.
And Dan has a very specific, very insightful term for this exact phenomenon.
Yeah.
Identity lag.
Identity lag.
Yeah. He explains it like this. Your body can change faster than your story.
Ah.
And when that happens, the soul gets confused.
The soul gets confused.
Yeah. And this highlights a crucial point that's often totally overlooked. Most people assume the hard part is just losing the weight itself, right? The physical act. But these sources reveal that the real crisis, as Dan calls it, often happens in the moments after that initial physical change. When the constant hunger maybe fades, old rituals dissolve, and someone is left feeling completely unrecognizable to themselves.
Huh.
It's this profound disconnect between the external self, what they see in the mirror, and their internal narrative, their sense of who they are.
And Adrienne's struggle, the sources make it really clear, it wasn't about the lost pounds at all. Not really. She was mourning the version of herself who had carried them.
Mourning. That's a powerful word choice.
It is. She missed the woman who was good at using jokes to manage a room, who knew exactly which sweaters to wear, who navigated life with a certain familiar self-assurance, even if it was tied to her previous size. Now, in this new body, she felt like a body in transition and a mind without a map, just totally unsure how to inhabit this new unfamiliar frame. It felt like a loss, not a gain.
And this is such a critical point. The transformation isn't just physical, it's fundamentally existential. The challenge isn't just adjusting to a new clothing size or figuring out a healthier diet. It's about, as Dan puts it, learning how to belong to yourself again.
Belong to yourself again.
Yeah, when your outside no longer matches your inside story, your deep sense of who you are. And that requires way more than just diet tips or exercise plans, obviously. It demands a deep internal reconstruction, almost like building a new internal home for yourself.
Okay, so with all this in mind, this quiet window, the confusion, the identity lag, what does this actually mean for making lasting change? How does Dan Hollis guide people through these incredibly tricky internal landscapes? Well, our sources tell us he builds scaffolding in the space semaglutide opens. Things like framework, identity, ritual, language.
Scaffolding. That's a great visual.
Isn't it? This isn't about quick fixes at all. It's about nothing less than rewriting the story people were too full to finish.
Exactly. And Dan's approach with Adrienne, for instance, wasn't about giving superficial compliments, which, let's be honest, often miss the point entirely in these situations.
Right, they can feel really hollow.
Totally.
Yeah.
Instead, he just listened like a mirror that doesn't ask questions, only returns what you're ready to see. He understood she needed space to process, not, platitudes or someone tried to cheerlead her out of it. As he wisely put it, the weight loss is just the clearing. The becoming takes longer.
The becoming takes longer. I like that.
Yeah. So their work together focused really profoundly on language, on redefining these deeply ingrained concepts that had anchored her old identity. So for Adrienne, things like shame became memory,
Okay.
control became
It's
curiosity,
an interesting shift.
and discipline became alignment. These subtle but really powerful shifts in how she perceived her own experiences allowed her to integrate her past without being defined by it anymore. It really is about building that new inner architecture, brick by brick.
And what feels truly compassionate and really empowering here is the concept of permission that Dan seems to foster. Adrienne was essentially given permission to not know who she was in this new phase. Permission to be awkward and uncertain in that in-between space.
Which must be such a relief.
Totally. Permission to build a new story without feeling like she had to completely burn the old one down. And the sources tell us that slowly, patiently, she started making progress. It wasn't dramatic, but she didn't flinch anymore. She didn't smile either. Not yet, but she stood there longer.
Stood there longer.
Yeah. That small act of just prolonged, unafraid presence in front of the mirror, That was a huge step forward in learning to belong to herself again. Now, let's shift gears slightly to another really crucial aspect of Dan Hollis's teaching, one that really challenges conventional wisdom. It's his radical reframing of failure, especially in the context of weight loss and personal change. I mean, most people see failure as weakness, right? Like you're broken or undisciplined.
Right. And this raises an important question. What if that perception of failure itself is actually the biggest barrier to progress? Dan offers a completely different lens, one that feels incredibly liberating. He says, failure isn't the end, it's a message, a moment of feedback.
Just feedback, not judgment.
Exactly. It's treated not as some shame story or a sign of moral weakness, but simply as a data point for learning. He clarifies that relapse isn't necessarily a betrayal of progress, but often it's just the brain asking for the old familiar rhythm.
Ah, seeking comfort.
Yeah, seeking comfort in what's known, in the patterns it has practiced for years, maybe decades. And critically, he points out that ignoring that need for familiarity, trying to just power through it, can actually lead to fracturing, not just a simple setback.
And he connects this back so powerfully to that quiet window idea we talked about. He states that people often aren't failing semaglutide. They're failing to prepare for what comes after it.
That reframes it completely.
Doesn't it? This perspective totally shifts the blame away from the individual, who often feels personally weak or like a failure, and points instead to maybe a lack of appropriate guidance or the lack of a prepared internal framework for that quiet space. So setbacks, then, they don't indicate personal weakness. They simply suggest the support system needs reinforcing.
Both internally and externally, yeah, that's precisely it. And what's so compelling here is how Dan encourages critical thinking about our ingrained ideas about perfection. He teaches that the shame isn't in failing. The shame is in pretending you are supposed to be perfect.
That hits hard.
It does. He explains that grace is built when you respond to a stumble by reaching for a better tool instead of reaching for blame. It's all about learning how to fail forward.
Fail forward.
Yeah, transforming a moment that feels like weakness into an opportunity for growth and building a stronger, more resilient foundation for the future. It's about designing a system for yourself, really, that acknowledges human imperfection rather than constantly fighting against it.
So today, we've really dug into how these significant personal changes, whether they're brought on by something like semaglutide or other major life events, how they can unveil much deeper psychological challenges, identity challenges than we often anticipate. It's clearly not just about the physical transformation itself. It's about the profound internal shifts, the creation of a whole new inner architecture that's required to truly integrate that new self.
Absolutely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Dan Hollis's whole approach suggests that true, lasting change probably isn't about suppression or restriction in the long run. It's about something much more profound, honest self-discovery, building that new internal framework for your identity, and ultimately learning how to belong to yourself again, especially in that quiet window of transformation. It's really a journey of deep personal reconstruction, isn't it? Where the external changes are maybe just the beginning of the real work.
So as you reflect on all this, maybe consider Dan Hollis's quite radical ideas. If hunger was never truly about food for some, and if failure is really just feedback, what other areas of your life might be waiting for you to build some new inner architecture in their own quiet spaces? What stories are you perhaps too full, or maybe just too busy to finish, or even to begin, simply because you haven't yet found the permission or perhaps the framework to do so? Definitely something to ponder, perhaps.